Hello, friends. It is I, host Derek, host Talking with Famous People. I'm here with Ash, I'm here with Brandon, and I'm talking about introverted intuition, extroverted intuition, FE, and NTP or NFJ. So, the reason I decided to make a video on this type is because my friend John, also known as St. Louis John, that's how he's referred to as, to distinguish him from other Johns. He's the only John in all of St. Louis. So, um, he mentioned that he had taken the Socionics test and got ENTP 91% as likely would be INFJ, it says. Well, the reason for that in general, I also score high on introverted intuition when I took that test, but I scored low on value in introverted intuition. So, as further preface to this, I'll say that in the past I have typed a lot of people, and when I really have trouble typing somebody, and I think they're an NTP, but it's not quite fitting, chances are they're an INFJ. Because, as Ash pointed out before we started streaming, there's a type of INFJ that displays a lot like an NE user. And the reason, I'm guessing, is because it's the same way the other way around. If you are intuitive Dom, you're going to be good at both kinds of intuition. You're just not going to very much value one of them. One of them's going to seem like it ought to take care of itself. For me, that's introverted intuition. What ought to take care of itself is picking the best of a set of ideas. I shouldn't have to worry about that. That should be obvious or something. Well, it is obvious if you're attuned to introverted intuition. I'm not very attuned to it, but I am able to successfully employ it in some circumstances. So, when I'm talking about this extroverted intuition variety of INFJ, I've got a couple of examples. My friend Corey is an example of an INFJ who displays a certain amount of extroverted intuition. Uh, he can display quite extroverted in a social setting. He likes to get FE rewards, obviously. He uses tool function of FE and introverted intuition to make jokes, display certain things socially, not display other things socially. But regardless, he's engaged with the group of people more actively than a lot of INFJs. The stereotypical INFJ interaction is pretty quiet, asks a lot of questions, and just generally shapes the receptions of people over time. So is aware of how a brief interaction here and a brief interaction later on and a brief interaction later on will connect within the hearer's mind. The person's keeping track of those interactions and is drawing conclusions about the INFJ and may not even be very, and usually isn't very aware of the fact that they're doing it even. And the INFJ can sort of paint in that person's head the picture the INFJ wants of the INFJ. That's a normal operating style for INFJ. You get somebody like Ken, however, or my friend Corey, and it doesn't quite play out like that. They're much more interested in being active in displaying and presenting the self rather than being quite so behind the scenes about shit. Comments, questions, thoughts? Hi, Kaizo.
Hey, what's up? I missed the context.
I'm live streaming about ENTPs and INFJs. Out in the past, I've mistyped some INFJs as ENTPs when they display more extroverted or have of a good display of extroverted intuition. That intuitives of either kind, extroverted or introverted intuitives, tend to have strong intuition of both sorts. So, depending on the display type of INFJ, they can really display a lot like ENTPs. Another example is a coach from Northern California. What was his name? A friend of mine, and I can't remember his name. Steven something. Steven. Fuck, I don't remember. Brooks. Correct.
Yeah, it's interesting because even when I was doing the cognitive functions test the other day, my NE was around 80% and my NI was around 78%. So it's possible that some INFJs may just be exhibiting the more NE kind of usage at the point of conversation.
Right.
And of course, if they've developed the TI as a tertiary function quite well, they could be utilizing the NETI kind of perspective instead of actually using the FE readily. So it's quite difficult sometimes and if you have ENTPs who've got developed tertiary function, you can kind of see how you can mistype those types.
Yeah, Stephen Brooks is a textbook example of somebody that's really easy to mistype as an ENTP, and I did type as an ENTP just before I really got to know him. The reason is he's a debate coach. He's a really strong debater. He understands how competition and flow debate works.
Yeah.
So his TI is rocking, and his NE is rocking, because debate requires one to use a lot of extroverted intuition in seeing possible responses to things and such. But one of the reasons it's okay in a situation like that, well, how do you tell the difference? Is he really one or the other? Maybe there's no such thing as that. No, he's definitely an INFJ. And part of the reason you know that is the kinds of arguments he favors, the kinds of explanations he favors. He's not discursive in his critiques. This is one of the things that different INFJs from ENTPs and INTPs. ENTPs and INTPs are much more likely to critique discourse as an argument in itself. In other words, they're much more comfortable with things being entirely detached from people.
Yeah.
TI is disinterest. FI is personal interest. FE is a disinterested analysis of personal interest. For all disinterest, you have to remove the particularist individual subjectivity of the person from the equation in order to deal with it properly. So what's interesting then is it seems to me that NTPs have a better, well, I mean, it's not surprising, but it's interesting how good INFJ's ability to do TI any stuff is, given the fact that there's a bit of a limit there. There's a wall where they argue really well with the objects as objects. They don't argue very well about the objective nature of the objects. So in other words, discourse critiques that say, okay, well, forget about what we're saying. Let's talk about why we're saying it and how we're saying it instead. That's where NTPs are a lot stronger than NFJs.
That's interesting. I was talking to Castro yesterday about the fact that most people in my educational sphere kind of held me back in the sense that they made me do things like homework, and they were essentials for me doing homework because it was the rules and the systems that applies to everyone. And the truth is, homework didn't make me do better. In fact, I did better without homework, and there was proof of it consistently. So I was trying to say that, well, clearly there's a belief that people who do homework do better in exams, and this is generally true. But in my case, based on how I actually study, homework is not necessary for me. So my argument was basically that these people basically were just getting in my way. But Castro's argument was, you shouldn't look at them like that, because this is just a system and this is how society works. There's general rules that applies to everyone. So instead of looking at it from a subjective manner or even objective manner, he was looking at it from the kind of how do I integrate myself with society without kind of looking down at the society, if that makes any sense. So he was concerned with,
yeah. I think it's because he sees it fundamentally as being about, life is about interacting with people, not ideas. And when your idea runs so afoul of the way that people normally interact with one another that it puts you in opposition to that, then you're no longer utilizing the fundamental engine of existence, dealing with other people, to live your life as you ought to. But of course, that's from an TIFE perspective. From an FETI perspective, it doesn't work like that. The ideas are just as important or more important in some contexts, and the people are aspirational. We need to learn to deal with our ideas in ways that engage people to better deal with the ideas themselves, rather than in ways that are confrontational, probably. But that's a different argument than the one Kesher was making.
Yeah, so in a sense, you're saying we need to basically learn how to get people to see things from our perspective. So it kind of convinced them instead of just putting the idea out there and just whatever happens, happens kind of thing.
Yeah, I used to be that philosophy. That my purpose was not to convince people of anything except to punish their wrongness. It's like, if I punish their wrongness, they won't make wrong arguments. Eventually, all they'll have left is the right ones. But
yeah,
it does. I mean, it works that way to a certain extent. I'm not disavowing that approach entirely, but even though it does work that way to some extent, most people, they may avoid making those arguments, but they won't. They think they'll probably become more entrenched, not oppositional rhetoric.
It's interesting. Like I've had some arguments as well, like on being more
basically. So it's like, to loosen them up requires inviting rhetoric, not.
And it means that they care about themselves. And I looked at it, well, I do care about myself. I just don't care about it in the way that you value something that means that you care about yourself. So I can pretty much survive in most environments. I'm not too picky about how things look or where things are, etc. I don't have particulars in many things. As long as I got my internet, my computer, a few things which I need to derive certain kind of knowledge or whatever kind of enjoyment I get from, I don't mind having those things. But everything else, I'm quite fluid. But people would say something like, well, you need to do this because this means that you care about yourself. But for me, I don't quite value that. And I'm not sure if I value that kind of reasoning just on the basis that that's what they said. They kind of expect me to say, well, okay, let's say just do this because it means this. But I don't agree. It's difficult for me to just agree with something just because.
Well, INFJs, in one incarnation, in the more introverted displaying incarnation of them, they lie low and snipe opportunities for display. So it's a good approach. If your goal is to shape people's perceptions of you entirely, rather than reveal to them the best aspects of yourself, or all aspects of yourself, and hope for the best. Like, it's basically my approach. If you really want to be effective shaping people's perceptions, you do it like INFJs do. You lie low and snipe. So you're sitting in a group conversation. You ask some questions if there's a moment where there's a lull and there seems to be something, someone needs to move something forward a bit. An INFJ will ask the right kind of question, the right kind of person. And then when that conversation goes for a bit and they feel like they have an insight that's meaningful and will make an impact, they'll make a statement.
Yeah.
And then they'll lie low again for a while. And so, like, everything that comes out of their mouth is perfect in some sense. And you go, like, you don't even think about it at first. If you're not actively thinking about typing people and cognitive functions and stuff, you don't notice them doing this. You just think, wow, they're cool. And then, whatever they're working on putting in your head is what you end up having in your head. The more the more extroverted displaying INFJs, well, like I come back to Ken in this instance where he was more actively involved in extroverting the process of the INFJ dealing with that shit than most INFJs I've seen. He was young and fairly like had come to be who he was in isolation, basically. Like kind of he was homeschooled kind of thing. So it's really interesting dealing with him and being able to participate somewhat in his actual growth and development and stuff over time, which is something INFJs typically do not allow others to see at all.
Yeah.
I've also had one big difference between ENTPs and INFJs I think is worth noting is that, in my opinion, INFJs have a tragically difficult time of optimization because what they have, what they've done, what they've worked with has worked so well for them for so long, and they've gotten better and better at it. And the fact that
I think what you're trying to say really is they require a system to kind of operate within, and that kind of makes them more efficient and optimized in a way. It's not like they need that system, but it's they do operate faster within a system, or at least some kind of rules that you've agreed to operate within, while ENTPs are more fluid in a sense.
That's not what I mean, though. What I mean is simply this. INFJs find it extraordinarily difficult to engage others through their own vulnerabilities. And until you really do that, the ceiling is lower in terms of ontological richness than it is for somebody who is human around everybody or is human around some people, you know? We all hide some stuff. Even somebody who's not very private like me has areas of his life that he'd rather not talk about, or I mean, I don't know. I don't really have any big secrets or anything, but there are things that make me feel less good about myself and things that make me feel more good about myself. And I'll usually talk about both, but I don't talk about everything. And there's a time and a place for things, and there's contexts where I just don't want to talk about it at all. So, and I'm like the least private person I know, the least private person I've ever encountered, probably. I'm just absolutely not private at all. But even I have some areas of privacy. So the thing is, I've experienced as an extroverted intuitor the phenomenon of actualizing externally. What does it mean to actualize externally? Well, to actualize to actualize for me means to make things in the world line up properly with certain kinds of narratives that I have about my own life, about the world in general, about other people, and stuff like that. So I don't feel as though any idea is really meaningful until I've communicated it in a situation like this, until it's been recorded. If the bot weren't in here, I'd feel like I was wasting my time. If we weren't live streaming, or if the bot weren't in here.
There's people. I'm serious now.
Hi. So the thing is, for an extrovert intuitor, I believe we do actualize externally. We understand who we are and become better and optimize by being vulnerable in front of people and learning which of those vulnerabilities are things that we need to alter in a way that protects the ego or protects the self from people who cross boundaries or whatever, and which of those vulnerabilities are things that hi, which of those vulnerabilities are things that allow you to
Hey guys.
Just a question.
Do you have some? Would you like to engage about
It's
this
just a
topic?
question.
Do you have any thoughts? You're kind of being. Your audio is kind of loud.
Yeah, that was really up. How old are you?
Ka mama seemed like a little bit of
I'm guessing 12.
Okay, 12. Can you mute, please, Ophelia? Because you're getting a lot of audio. I mean, you're getting a lot of echo from you. Or refresh.
Where are you guys from?
I'm from Los Angeles. We're in the middle of talking about INFJs, FJs, and ENTPs. If either of you would like to engage about that topic, you're welcome to. Right now, however, if you're just gonna be noisy and disruptive, we're gonna have to kick you. So if you want to mute, just thank you. There you go. All right, here we go. And here's another one.
No.
Don't kick up, Susie. Did you just kick those people?
Yeah, there was the same kids. There was same sound from all of the microphones.
Okay, but they were not causing audio problems at that point. Let them stay. Unlock the room. A little chaos is okay. All right, now behave yourselves, okay? Susie kicked you all because you were being silly. But I told her, just chill. You're fine, but just chill out, all right? Okay, so anyway, INFJs and ENTPs.
Mute.
You gotta mute that one too.
Is it not enough with one account? I can hear it's the same people on all the
Susie,
microphones.
as long as they're not disrupting anything, fine. If they start filling up the whole room with those things, well, there's a male version. Well, let's see what happens. I'm interested, at least. It's interesting. We can talk about INFJs and ENTPs anytime. Now we've got four of the same person in the room. Okay, so continuing on forward on this notion, I don't even know where I left off. This is the sort of thing that makes an extrovert and introvert completely lose their place. I'm just off the rails. Kaizo?
Well, okay, so we could resume from the sniper approach. So with ENTPs, they don't really mind just saying what they're saying and kind of building upon it as they're saying it and kind of refining their ideas, fixing all the logical inconsistencies as they go along. With INFJs, they kind of sit there, they understand what you're saying, and then they will kind of snipe these kind of points that kind of seem so perfect, just in the right time.
Yeah, they'll do it that way. And ENTPs, we can't stop talking. Basically, I can't. I mean, I'm super extroverted. You're a little bit less extroverted than I am, or at least you have I don't know if you're less extroverted, but you have a better balance of questions and answers, I guess. I tend to I don't ask a lot of questions.
I suppose I've actually learned a lot by questions because listening to people talk, you basically gauge how their mind works. So you can, I think a lot of the times I do listen to people. I see how they work, but a lot of the times people realize after maybe knowing me for 5 months that they don't actually know anything about my life, because all this time they've been talking, I've been talking, but with ideas that are so abstract that it's got nothing to do with anything to do with my life most of the times.
Well, there's a phenomenon that happens. It used to happen in my marriage. It happened with Kimberly too. If I talk to somebody that we both know or something, then I get off the phone with them. Kimberly will be like, "Oh, so how's it going with that person and their significant other?" And I'll be like, "I don't know. I didn't talk about that." Well, okay,
exactly.
How's their kids? I don't know.
Exactly.
Why would I bother asking about those kind of things?
Yeah, it's true. Whenever my one of my best friends, she used to talk to me all the time, and she's like, at one moment she was like, "We've been best friends for 5 years, but I don't know anything about your personal life. Even like we talk about everything and ideas and so much abstract things, but you don't really tell me what happened yesterday to you or what's gonna." It's almost like she felt like she didn't really know me as a person, and worse off, it's like, oh, what happened to this person's life? etc., etc. I just don't know minor details about people's lives like that. I'm not interested, at least not intrinsically. It's not something that, it's not something I value. I value more what kind of person they are, what kind of ideas that they have.
Well, let me say that INFJs probably do keep track of that stuff, even though they're much less earthy in their FE than is the ISFJ. ISFJ also has FE in the second slot, but ISFJ is a lot more earthy, is the best way to put it, than is the INFJ. And what I mean by that is ISFJ sees people's feelings in the moment much. They're much more of a real-time FE thing. They do keep track of their people's perceptions of them across time, but it's more like, am I in that person's good graces or not? And if they are, then everything's cool, and they continue to be nice and operate on a real-time basis where they go, okay, this person's upset right now, and so therefore we should sort of do something about that. We should make them feel better. We should hop to do something about it. ISFJ is a bit of that. INFJ is much more concerned with their perceptions across time. INFJ is much more likely to notice that they don't want to be perceived as too nice, or they don't want to be perceived as a pushover in any sense. That they want to be perceived as somebody who has good defenses. So for INFJ, then they probably will be perceived as that, and they probably do have good defenses, and they probably execute those quite well. They can also be very attacky if you get the wrong one. Certain INFJs are narcissists. Certainly, I think, to the extent that it's just in the same way that ENTP correlates a little bit with sociopathy because of the polar FI. INFJ correlates a little bit with narcissism because of the NI-FE combo there, where you've got NI getting a single red course about their FE shit. If they grow up in a bad enough environment, and or if it just doesn't work for them or something like that, then they could end up being a narcissist and trying to control everybody around them with their bullshit. So
yeah, they do.
In that way.
And I'll tell you who the narcissists were. The INFJ narcissist, there's one person in the world that they hate more than anybody, and that's the ENTP. Because if anybody's going to see through their bullshit and call it out, it's the ENTP.
I'll call it out.
No, you don't.
I will call it out.
No, you'll dance. That's what you'll do. You don't call it out, you dance for them. Yeah.
What about INFJ ENTP relationships? From my experience, it seems like they almost kind of know how we feel way more than we do, in the sense that they can kind of gauge why we're doing things. In my experience with them, they've kind of been able to help me understand why I do things and why I did things way more than I can even understand my own self. So it's almost like they get me through that thinking process quite well. ISFJs, it's more they're there for me. With INFJs, it's more like they're trying to help me go through that process myself instead of just being there for me, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, I think that INFJ is the second best relationship for ENTP after ISFJ. I think that the reason for that is the NI pair up feels very comfortable, whereas INTJ or INFJ feels very comfortable because the thing that we assume takes care of itself, NI, is the nature of the other person, and the thing that they assume takes care of itself, NE, is the nature of the other person. But the problem with that relationship, also the polars work. So the polars work great. It's 6-7 on the polar. Same thing as with the ISFJ. The problem is the SI. The thing that you say you don't actually care much about, that other people say that you need to do that to take care of yourself. but that's not really important to you. You don't actually need to do that because that's not important to you. What you really are saying, in my opinion, is that you've learned to prefer to do without SI rather than deal with it yourself. The reason you don't think it's very important is because there's a third option. You don't have to deal with it yourself or forsake it. If you get an SI dom, they take care of it for you naturally, without any negotiations or anything. And then you start to value it. Once you have it, you realize, oh, this is my substitute for FI. This is how I understand how I really feel. I really understand this kind of feeling. I understand how it feels good to get into the bath when you're cold or whatever. I understand how it feels good to get into bed when you're tired. Those things I can understand and are concrete. They are real and sensory things that I can actually fucking sink my teeth into, put my roots down into, and understand who I am as a being. Because as beings, we are all both animals and metaphysical agents combined at the same time. We are constrained by the physical law of non-contradiction and the rules associated thereof, and we are constrained equally, and we are liberated equally by the metaphysical realm of conditionality, whereby we can project forward in time and back in time, whereby we can be in multiple places at once, and conceive of universes that aren't constrained by causality in the physical world. So it means that you have to connect to your animal self in some sense to be fulfilled. I didn't know what it meant to be fulfilled or feel like satisfied or not be hungry for something global to change. That was the thing. When you're hungry for something global to change, you're always hungry for something local to change. So it's like you're never satisfied. I'm still always hungry for something local, in some sense.
Yeah.
But the frame is set. I know where the ground is. And if you're not planted in SI ground, you've got no connection to how you feel. You got no FI, you got no SI.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, you end up, for example, I mean, I've been having this idea of going to the gym. I even got an apartment in town center where the gym is only 10 minutes away. But the only reason why I actually took that gym is because it was 24 hours access. So I couldn't even time myself to go to the gym at a certain time because the lack of SI is there. I mean, I know I need to go to the gym. It's something which is good for me, but I still can't actually actualize it because of the timetable, waking up at a certain time, keeping flow of everything, what time I eat, what food I eat, what kind of nutrition it's useful for me to, all these things, keeping track of them and just doing it every day, that following that routine that just doesn't seem to have any excitement is difficult.
But I can tell your legs look hot. You got some great legs,
it is
though. You got the best legs out there.
In all of Britain. We've checked.
Your legs are hot. They do not compare to anyone else's.
Except mine. Oh, yeah. That's a hot leg.
He's got some sticks.
It's an interpretive dance.
Yeah.
Today we're live streaming interpretive dance.
No, he was at one time a woman.
In a past life.
In a few past lives.
Mm-hmm. I was. Digression. I don't know if you've heard, I was the first adopter of Soviet Russia. I was a Soviet gymnast back in Tsarist Russia. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
He was a woman, and he couldn't get it right. So now he's in the form of a man.
Yeah. Finally.
Wow.
It's like they kept going, okay, Eric, we gotta get you to finish this life properly so that you can finally die and go to heaven or something. And they kept making me be a woman, and it didn't work. So finally they're like, all right, we'll make you a dude.
Wow. I mean, you've basically crossed the gender distinction. You literally translated yourself from Erica to Eric.
Well, no, my name wasn't Erica. My name was Katerina.
Oh, okay. So you also crossed the cultural boundaries as well. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Katerina Karnikova.
And whereas when I was Katerina, I was very socialist. Now
Wow.
I'm a libertarian as a male.
See, the thing with true libertarianism or true socialism, to be honest, true any belief in a system is inherently flawed. I mean, because some of the libertarian arguments are that the system will take care of itself. You know, you decentralize government, etc. You certain.
You cut out.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Are you back? I want to.
Yeah, I'm back.
Yeah, I get the gist of what you're saying. That libertarianism breaks down at a certain point. It does break down at a certain point, but the argument you're making is disingenuous. It's saying because libertarianism breaks down at some point, it's the same sort of thing as other flawed systems. It's absolutely not. Libertarianism is the notion that we ought not use force unless it's absolutely necessary against individual people. And it's the recognition of the fact that no government does anything. Individual people use force against other individual people for certain justifications. That's an accurate description of reality. Libertarianism is the only one that begins with an accurate description of reality. That's what makes it superior to all other philosophies in terms of political philosophies.
Yeah. And it's in essence it makes perfect sense. However, in practice, so in principle, it's actually what I'd get tuned to, but in practice, it starts to kind of it breaks down because most people, as I think, are sheep. They're sheeple. So the problem with sheeple is giving power to someone who doesn't have the power to actually actualize that power in the better sense isn't good. So, for example, like giving democracy to like one of these broken down countries, I'm not going to name any, but it's not going to work because democracy works for an educated population, same as libertarianism kind of works for people who have a knack for understanding themselves and how systems even operate. For example, most people right now don't even know that, for example, law is not based on morality. Law is just based on having a system that creates a place where you can predict behavior, because if you put people in jail for killing, that kind of thing.
That's not right, though. None of that stuff you said
No,
is right.
it's not right.
I mean, the first thing you said is right is that democracy won't work in the Middle East. Absolutely won't work in the Middle East. Democracy is not the goal here. Libertarianism is. Now, libertarianism is simply the idea that transgression gets punished, non-transgression doesn't. It's that basic idea. And since transgression is clearly defined, I mean, it's not something that's culturally mushy. If the Middle East were libertarian, that would mean they wouldn't get to force people to do shit. They wouldn't get to force the women to do shit. They wouldn't get to force it's like individual humans forcing other individual humans. If you get a large enough group of individual humans who want to force and have the ability to force, then they will force.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm not providing a prescription as to how we get to this libertarian utopia where everyone's held accountable and where everyone's held accountable for all wrongdoings and not accountable for anything that's not a wrongdoing. That's the ideal, though. So if you want to talk about why libertarianism doesn't work, you end up arguing at the very, very margins, and you say the reason libertarianism doesn't work is because we ought not allow people to have a nuclear bomb.
Yeah, I see your point.
Libertarianism would say, well, he hasn't done anything wrong. He hasn't committed any harm. He just has a nuclear bomb. That's not guilty of any wrongdoing. He's not transgressed against anybody. So therefore, nobody should be able to force him to give up that nuclear bomb. I don't agree with that. I don't think anybody should have a nuclear bomb. So there are limits to libertarianism. However, don't compare limits to limits by saying because this breaks down at some point and that breaks down at some point, they're the same. Note that it's the only system that breaks down anywhere close to that. It takes a long time for libertarianism to break down. You got to go way to the margins. You got to get up there to nuclear bombs and germ warfare and shit like that for it to actually not work conceptually. The other systems of analysis break down immediately and completely. They fall apart into a morass of garbage. Any kind of
So are you comparing?
redistributionist
Yeah.
policies, any kind of fucking socialist bullshit, any kind of social democracy, let's all help the poor kind of shit, it breaks down immediately. It doesn't last 1 fucking second. The argumentation is weak as fuck.
Well, the only solution then is to have a system that is rooted in libertarianism, but acknowledges the points at which libertarianism breaks down. So I suppose not having a purist approach to libertarianism, but having a practical approach to libertarianism.
Well, yeah, and my advocacy regarding that is begin with a rights-based framework when discussing any law. If, in fact, you feel as though there needs to be rights violations in order to preserve some sort of social interest, then first acknowledge, okay, is this the best we can do? Is this the limit of our imagination? We can't be imaginative enough to come up with some way to constrain people's behavior that doesn't violate rights. Look at speed bumps versus stop signs, or speed bumps versus speed limits. You have speed bumps in the road. I don't like speed bumps at all. I'm not advocating we get speed bumps. I'm giving you an example of a different approach, right? A speed bump in the road slows you down. Nobody gets pulled over. Nobody gets a ticket. The consequences are natural for going too fast. Now, here's another example. They have in America now these signs that say, this is your speed, and it'll flash if you're going faster than the speed limit. Those signs are vastly more effective at getting people to slow down, reducing accidents, and everything like that, than enforcing traffic laws. Vastly. Statistics have proved it. They're vastly more effective. You know what makes them hugely more effective? If you put a smiley face or a frowny face on it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think the difficulty is trying to get people to exist within those nuances. That's the problem. Is people kind of see that people like to be defined within a system like, okay, speed bumps, therefore stops people from crashing. They like something that is more tangible. That's the problem.
Okay, but no, the problem is, who cares what the fuck they like? If people are getting pulled over and killed by the cops, it's like somebody's not done anything wrong really, but the cop pulls them over, and it turns out they got a bench warrant because they didn't pay a thing before, and the guy gets pulled out of the car, and he's young and stupid and tries to run, and he ends up getting killed, right? What's he killed for? Some traffic ticket. He didn't even ever do any harm. He's killed, like that guy in Michigan. He had gotten like 25 tickets or something. He got shit tons of tickets. And eventually they pulled him over and they killed him. You put somebody in that situation where you're forcing people at gunpoint to pay penalties even though they've done nothing wrong, just for breaking some rule that incur no liability of any sort, then the harms of that process will always, always, always outweigh the benefits, because what the number one thing is a lack of imagination. We can't find a way to do this that doesn't violate people's rights. Yes, we can.
Well, we can, but I think the one thing which I definitely don't like is the whole seatbelt laws. Like you're being charged or fined for not wearing a seatbelt, and this is ridiculous because sometimes seatbelts actually are going to be the cause of your death. It's not one of those things which it's not even guaranteed that wearing a seatbelt will save your life. A lot of the times, it will be the thing that kills you because either giving you a concussion or not allowing you to escape the vehicle in time for you to reach safety. So laws like that, which then becomes a bit too specific, you kind of lose the point there. So I do agree with you in certain things like that. But then if I digress a little bit, going to a different point, one of the other points I suppose with the libertarian approach, which might cause, is tyranny of the majority, in the sense that okay, so let's present an idea. Okay, people in general will not stop, let's say, women from going to universities or colleges because people generally want money, because the driving factor may be capitalism of some sort, etc. So therefore, if you don't let women into your college, you're going to make less money because they're 50% of the population. Therefore, you won't make as much money. But if the society is based with uneducated people with certain kind of biases, they may all just agree and say, well, you know what, we all won't allow women into our colleges, and form some kind of monopoly. How would you combat that kind of idea and stop it from kind of reaching?
Well, I think that one of the legitimate jobs of government is to protect the ecosystem. You know, a certain amount of regulation for anti-competitive practices should be legally prohibited. Certain kinds of anti-competitive practices. The thing is, it's tricky. Like when you get down to the nitty-gritty and the specifics of it, you get tricky in a couple of different ways. You get tricky on the grounds that on shit like that. Well, what kind of regulations are appropriate to protect the competitive ecosystem, and which kinds are invasive? I mean, a lot of things will fix themselves. So there's an inherency problem with arguing against libertarianism, which inherency is the issue that says, why should we do what you're saying? If we should do what you're saying, maybe, but before we agree that we should do what you're saying, there needs to be a problem in the status quo. An outline structure. No, there needs to be a problem in the status quo that your thing that you're saying addresses, and there needs to be a barrier to solvency in the status quo. Which means, here's an example of something that has no inherency. Little Joey can't go on this ride because he's not tall enough. He's only 4 feet tall, and you have to be 4 feet 2 to go on this ride. And he really wants to go on the ride. What should we do? Well, the answer is wait till he gets a little bit taller. The answer is not get him surgery for his legs to make him taller. And the reason is because the problem, there's no inherency to your plan. Inherency requires that the problem will not solve itself in a reasonable amount of time in the status quo, and that your solution, your action is necessary to address the problem. If the problem will solve itself, then there's no reason to do anything. And the challenge that non-libertarians have is to explain why it is that the government ought intercede to protect people who've made bad investments or stuff like that. For example, when the housing bubble burst in America, when the banks, when banks fail, that's a different matter. It's like those kind of complications. Those get very, very tricky, and they are not simple things to resolve exactly what one ought to do. A similar thing in that regard is the environment. I'm in favor of a certain amount of environmental regulation because environmental pollution is transgressive. Huh? Oh, we're talking about it. Okay. It is transgressive. So, and there's no other agent that can deal with it. My whole point is, every time we talk about government, every time we talk about law, every time we talk about constraint on the individual, we should begin by discussing rights. And we say, okay, we have a societal problem. The biggest problem is people go into government and they think that they're there to do stuff. The United States Congress was supposed to meet for 2 weeks a year.
Okay, I see your point. So, well, if you were to implement, let's say, a libertarian approach to govern society, would you want it to be kind of like an anarcho-capitalist kind of approach, whereby you just do it straight away and problems will sort itself through time, just like evolution mechanism? Or would you want it to be like do it slowly through decentralization, making government? Yeah, how would you want it to do it?
First of all, I would say the U.S. has it exactly backwards. We had it right in the Constitution. We have it backwards now. The local community should have, to the extent that taxes are taken, most of those taxes should go to your local community, and the least amount of those taxes should go to the federal government. And the state in between them, to the extent that we need a state government. But the thing is, we have it the other way around. The federal government its job should be to police the states, whose job it should be to police the local government. So federal and state government should not deal with individual people at all, basically. They should deal with the other levels of government. The federal government should be very small. It should manage the military, and it should police state governments to make sure they are protecting the rights of the citizens. And the state government should be policing the local government. I mean, the federal government should be policing the state government to make sure they're protecting the rights of the citizens from intrusion by the local governments, and then the local governments should be tasked with actually governing the people's lives.
That wasn't constitutional until the 14th Amendment was passed, because the Bill of Rights didn't apply to the people, between the people and the state. It applied between the people and the federal government. So that's not right.
Okay, well, actually, Mark, that's not the 14th Amendment that did that. It's the judicial decision on the issue of incorporation, and it only applies to certain elements of the Bill of Rights. But that was a good observation. I love it when people challenge me like that.
Well, it's like the first part of the 14th Amendment. There's 3 parts to it.
What is the first? It doesn't say the Bill of Rights now applies to all the people. In fact, not all the Bill of Rights does. Read on incorporation. The judicial principle of incorporation as determined in a 1921, I think, Supreme Court case where they incorporated first they incorporated just one of the amendments in the Bill of Rights, and then they've since incorporated other elements of the Bill of Rights to apply to the people directly. I mean, apply to to citizens of the states, not just to the federal government. So, you're right, but you're not completely right, because not all the Bill of Rights does apply to citizens of the states. It just applies to citizens of the federal government.
Yeah, it just applies to the citizens of the federal government, right? That's what the 14th Amendment says. It says, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Meaning, the Bill of Rights applies to you.
Well, you would think that's what it means. It doesn't actually mean that. In fact, the courts have been very clear on that. What it means is that some of the Bill of Rights get applied to citizens gets applied to citizens as citizens of states, and some of them don't.
Okay, so.
But I agree with you that that's what it should mean.
Wait, are there any exceptions? For example, let's say like a terrorist, for example, do they have equal protection under the law and fair, I suppose?
They should. I mean, the thing is, the courts have been not good about enforcing constitutional limits on government in general, and they tend to make exceptions. There's a FISA court, and it's supposed to be for international stuff. And it's like says, okay, well, this is for secret government shit where you're supposed to have some sort of oversight of the government. So we just have these secret court things where the government can violate people's rights in secret, but it gets court approval because it's national security issue kind of thing. It's complete bullshit. It's not that FISA court is not supposed to apply to American citizens at all, but they make exceptions to that too. And you'll notice that that amendment that Natos Mark read refers to citizens of I think it says these United States still at the time when that was passed, because that's the point. This is a federation of
this clause has been
states.
used by the federal judiciary to make most of the Bill of Rights applicable to the states, and as to recognize substantive and procedural requirements that state laws must satisfy.
I mean, I agree with you that that's what it did, and I'm also right. It did. Look it up. Ask Google this. Which elements? Which rights in the Bill of Rights are not incorporated? No, this is a live stream to the main channel. It's supposed to be about INFJs and ENTPs, but we started getting off on some other topic here.
Oh, well, that's pretty off topic.
Yeah. Well, we were on topic for a while.
Yeah, we were on topic for quite a while. But to be honest, it just proves to show that that's what an ENTP would do. Come in there, challenge the idea and present their own facts, or at least the same facts, but in a different interpretation.
So, Mark, what do you get when you Google which of the Bill of Rights are not incorporated?
Well, a hell of a lot of them are. I see the ones that are incorporated.
point is that amendment didn't make it such that they were all incorporated all of a sudden. They've had to be incorporated in a series of court decisions.
Well, I mean, yeah, most of the change does happen through the court, but the wording's there that allowed that.
I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you. What happened to your finger?
Well, there's an interesting story, and in Kenya, the government tried to bring in breathalyzer tests for people suspected of drinking on the streets, and the people took the government to court, and the government lost the case, and the people's argument was that breathalyzers were inhygienic and may actually transfer diseases across citizens. So in the end, there is no more breathalyzer tests in Kenya. So.
Yeah, I can't find that. But like for example, education. Like the only reason the government's really involved in education is because, well, the courts did that. The courts allowed that to happen. And I mean, they look at the wording and then they, I don't know, make it move and squirm and not mean the same thing as it did before.
Kind of like the Bible.
Well, yeah, sure. I think people do that too. I agree with you.
Sorry.
Incorporation in the U.S. allows the process by which American courts have applied portions of the U.S. Bill of Rights to the states. When it was first ratified, the Bill of Rights only protected the rights enumerated from federal infringement, allowing states and local governments to embrace them. However, beginning in 1897, with Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad versus State of Chicago, various portions have been held to have been incorporated against state and local governments through the 14th Amendment. Prior to the ratification of the 14th Amendment and the development of the incorporation doctrine, the Supreme Court in 1833 held that in Barron versus Baltimore, the Bill of Rights applied only to the federal but not any state governments. Even years after the ratification of the 14th Amendment, the Supreme Court in the United States versus Pruitt still held that the First and Second Amendments did not apply to state governments. However, beginning in the 1920s, a series of United States Supreme Court decisions interpreted the 14th Amendment to incorporate most portions of the Bill of Rights, making these portions for the first time enforceable against state governments. The doctrine of incorporation has been traced back to those court cases previously named, in which the Supreme Court appeared to require just some form of just compensation for property appropriated to state and local authorities, or more commonly, in which the court expressly held the states were bound to protect freedom of speech. Since that time, the court has steadily incorporated most of the significant portions of the Bill of Rights. Provisions of the Supreme Court that has either refused to incorporate or which possible incorporation has been addressed include the Fifth Amendment right to indictment by a grand jury and the Seventh Amendment right to a jury trial in civil lawsuits. That's important. Both those are hugely important. Incorporation both applies procedurally and substantively to the guarantees of the states. Thus, procedurally, only a jury can convict a defendant of a serious crime. Since the Sixth Amendment jury trial right has been incorporated against states substantively. For example, states must recognize the First Amendment prohibition against state-established religion, regardless of whether state laws or constitutions afford such prohibition. The Supreme Court has declined, however, to apply new procedural constitutional rights retroactively against states in criminal cases, with limited exceptions and in ways constitutional requirements. The states can prove that a constitutional violation was harmless beyond a reasonable doubt. There you go. Incorporation in a nutshell. Thanks, Wikipedia.
So 1920.
Those things about jury trials and grand jury indictments are significant because they limit the defendant's right in general to push back against the coercive force of legal action taken against somebody. So, they are significant. And
Yeah.
that's a little lesson in law and order today. The U.S. Constitution, they're trying to make it go away. But I'm here and so is Mark, and we're yelling all the time. And that's because we're smart, and we reject their anti-libertineness. Thanks, everybody, for applauding. That song was called Host Eric Sings About Something. Is that a good time to end the live stream? It's about an hour now.
Yes, don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.
Oh, you heard the woman.
I'm taking you.